From the studios of Blackwater Media in the city of Atlanta, it is time for another episode of the Dr. William Lester Show, and I'm very glad to be with you for this edition of the program. As you know, we have been very much involved with discussing cool vintage horror films, fantasy films, in celebration of the Halloween season. And we've discussed a number of films. We're certainly going to continue that tonight. And I hope that the listeners have been kind of following along with the information. I really hope that some of you have chosen to adopt the Cool Vintage Horror Movie Halloween Film Festival as one of your new traditions. As I said previously, it's been something that I've been doing now for about a decade, and it never loses its steam. It's always fun. I always look forward to it. It's always exciting, and it's just a marvelous way to usher in the Halloween season. On this episode, we're going to talk about one of my all-time favorites. One that I never get tired of watching, one that I look forward to each year. And it is brought to you by Universal Studios. And Universal became a staple of the horror genre, going all the way back to the 20s with Lon Chaney Sr. But in this film, we're talking primarily about the work of his son, Lon Chaney Jr., in the classic film The Wolfman. And so let's run down some of the details about this film, about the production of this film. This was a film that was released in December of 1941, directed and produced by George Wagner, written by Kurt Siodmak, very famous screenplay. Of course, as I said, Universal Studios. Here's what's interesting. That film was produced on a budget of $180,000. And it was a lot of money in 1941. Now, in today's money, that's equivalent to around $3 million. So it kind of gives you some context about how the budgets of these type of films have kind of skyrocketed beyond imagination. $180,000 budget, $3 million equivalent today. Fantastic cast. I want to run down with you. Of course, Lon Chaney Jr. is the Wolfman / the alter ego Lawrence Talbot. The great Claude Rains plays his father, Sir John Talbot. Warren William plays Dr. Lloyd. The legendary Ralph Bellamy plays Paul Mumford. He is, in one part of the film he's referred to as a captain, in another part of the film he's referred to as a colonel. So I know that his character is the local constable, and I don't know whether or not the colonel refers to a previous military status. Patrick Knowles plays Frank Andrews, and Patrick Knowles is a figure that pops up in a number of the Universal horror films. Of course, the legendary Bela Lugosi is in the film, and he plays Bela the Gypsy, a character that is central to the storyline. Maria Ospinskaya plays the Gypsy Maleva, who is also the mother of the Bela Lugosi character. Evelyn Ankers plays Gwen Conliffe, and she's really what you would call the love interest, if you will. Her father, Charles Conliffe, and proprietor of the antique store in the story, is played by J.M. Kerrigan. Faye Helm plays Jenny Williams, who is a friend of the Evelyn Ankers character, Gwen. And Forrester Harvey plays the The character, I was trying to think of how I can describe him. He's just a little nervous character. He seems to assist the doctor, he assists the police, but his character's name is Twiddle. And he injects a little bit of humor and fun into the proceedings. So basically, this story seems to be set in one of these nondescript European countries. Maybe it's England, but I don't think it's ever said in the film. And I think this is something that Universal picked up on during their run of great horror classics. You kind of have these somewhat generic European style settings, very, very lush settings that you see in the film. A lot of atmosphere here. A lot of dark forests, a lot of subdued lighting, a lot of fog. And these are the things that, even by 1941, these are the things that have already become a signature motif of Universal horror. And this film is filled with all of the kind of identifying earmarks of Universal horror. But basically, Lawrence Talbot is returning back home after 18 years. Apparently his brother has been killed in a hunting accident, and so there's a thing running through the film where you have the son returning home, and there has apparently been some kind of strained relationship between father and son, between Lawrence and Sir John. And so there are sequences in the film where you see this kind of father-son conflict, and they both want it to be fixed. And so, look for that in the film. Of course, these other characters, Dr. Lloyd, Paul Mumford, and Frank Andrews. Frank Andrews, played by Patrick Knowles, is basically the gamekeeper on the Talbot estate. And of course, Paul Mumford is like the local constable, and of course, Dr. Lloyd is the doctor of the town, and they form a circle of friends for John Talbot, and of course, in welcoming back Lawrence Talbot. Now, in the film, Sir John has turned the attic into an observatory, and Larry Talbot, with some technical skills, goes up to the observatory, and he does a little bit of work on the telescope. I think he installs some glass, and I guess he kind of recalibrates everything. And he, in testing the refractor, he spies Gwen Conliffe across town working in the antique shop, and he's smitten with her. She's a lovely girl. And of course, he's going to make it his business to meet her. And so there's a fantastic scene with him in the antique store, and they're kind of going back and forth. And he's trying to make a date with her, and she's kind of playing hard to get, and so on. But in the midst of all that, he purchases an antique cane that has a silver wolf's head as the handle, and inside the wolf head there's also the pentagram, the 5-pointed star. And so you have this immediate appearance of this symbolism, of this occult symbolism. And he, at that moment, is not aware of any of the metaphysical connotations of that symbol. And of course, she explains it to him, and he laughs this off. I mean, of course, this is the kind of superstitious nonsense that I would expect to find here in this provincial little town. And of course, he buys the cane, and he's on his way. Now, what ends up happening, and I want to be careful here because, I don't want to, do too much spoiling, and I want you guys to enjoy the film. But he ends up with Gwen and her friend Jenny Williams, who's played by Faye Helm, and they're just kind of out walking in the evening, And they come upon a gypsy camp. Apparently, the gypsies come through this town every autumn. They're singers and dancers, musicians, fortune tellers, and what have you. And they, of course, it's very entertaining. Hey, let's get our fortunes read. And Jenny goes in and she gets her palm read. She gets her palm read by the Bela Lugosi character, the gypsy Bela. And there's a whole thing there with some signs and some symbolism, and kind of a harbinger of things to come. I won't give it all away, but I will say that before that night is over, Jenny Williams is ripped apart by a werewolf. And in an attempt to rescue her, Lawrence is, of course, bitten. And as we all know, if you're bitten by a werewolf and you live, you are now cursed to be a werewolf. And so we're off and running. Now, of course, this thing is going on in the town where, okay, you have the sudden reappearance of Larry Talbot. You have the horrible death of Jenny Williams in the forest. You have the gypsies here. And the gypsies always are the target of local angst and suspicion because they're the outsiders, right? And so clearly there's a problem, because Larry says, "Hey, I killed a wolf. I beat this wolf to death with my cane, and it was attacking Jenny, and so I went after it, and it bit me in the process. But there's no injury. There's no wound. It heals overnight. Because the next morning, it's not there. The only thing that's there where there should have been injuries is the pentagram. And so everybody's trying to answer these seemingly unanswerable questions. What was it that attacked Jenny Williams out on the moors? What was it that Larry was fighting with and bitten by? His clothes were ripped to shreds. Was this just a madman? Is Larry imagining this wolf creature, or what's going on? So eventually he has a kind of confrontation, and by confrontation I don't mean necessarily negative or hostile. But he has this confrontation with Mileva, the gypsy woman, and she tells him exactly what happened. What happened to Jenny Williams, what happened to him, and what happened to the wolf that he killed. And of course, he can't believe it. It's just too fantastic. These things can't be real, right? But of course they are. And it is. And it's happening. And Larry Talbot is now cursed. On the next full moon, he's going to turn into a werewolf. And he's going to lurk the forests. And he's going to wreak havoc, murder, and mayhem. And we see this played out. And the whole while, Larry is trying to come to grips with what's happening. Is this me? Am I turning into this creature? And why is this happening? How could this be true? How can somebody explain this to me? And so you see that whole thing played out. His love interest, Gwen Conliffe, the Evelyn Ankers character, is kind of in the middle of things. She's kind of torn because, she's lost her best friend, was mutilated in the forest. Larry tried to rescue her. He's been bitten. He's starting to believe, Mileva the gypsy, that he's actually under some curse. He's starting to believe that this monster that people are talking about is him. And of course, she's dissuading him. Oh, you can't believe that. These just old gypsies. They make up stories. But it's settling in his mind that yes, in fact, it is him. And the initial transformation sequence in the film is fantastic. And it shows him just in this moment of stress and anxiety and, bordering on madness. And so look for that scene, the initial transformation into the werewolf. Now, there's also this ongoing thing between Larry and his father, Sir John. Sir John, too, he's very skeptical, of course, of these gypsy stories. And he thinks that Larry's just, under a lot of pressure. He's back in town, back in the country after 18 years. And the girl is murdered. He's attacked. He's traumatized. Nobody knows what's happened. He just chalks all this up to, you've been under a lot of pressure, son. But of course, as the observer, we know better. We know better. We know that his fears are well-founded. We know what he is. We know what's coming. So, moving towards the end of the film, when he finally comes to grips with what he is and he accepts it, and he knows the people, the people like Frank Andrews and the doctor and everybody, Paul Munford, they're out in the forest hunting, but they don't know that what they're actually hunting for is him. They think they're looking for some mad, crazed wolf or something that's been, plaguing the town. But he knows they're looking for him. They're hunting for him. And he's been confined to a chair inside Talbot Castle. And his father basically restrains him in order to prove, right? I'm going to tie you up. You're going to sit here. You're going to stay here. And when you find out, when you don't turn into a monster, that should prove to you that this is all nonsense. But of course, it's not nonsense. And, well, before we get to the and, let me tell you what I'm enjoying tonight on the show. I am having a little Christian Brothers brandy, which is, brandy is one of those, it's just perfect as we get into the cooler months. It's kind of difficult in the summer, I have to admit, but as we get into the autumn and deeper into the year, it's a wonderful, warm, full-bodied drink that's perfect for sipping. And so I have a wonderful little goblet of some Christian Brothers. It's a very good brandy, a very old school brand, and of course it's priced right. I think the bottle I picked up was like $9, and it's just a wonderful drink and an outstanding value. Now I've paired that tonight with something a little bit unorthodox. I've paired that with a Blender's Gold Churchill cigar. And let me tell you about Blender's Gold, because Blender's Gold embodies what I've been saying on the show. It is a private label hand-rolled cigar. It's a premium made cigar, but it's a private label cigar that's sold by Walgreens. That's right. You won't find it in your cigar store, your local tobacconist. It's a private label cigar sold exclusively through Walgreens. And it's a very good little cigar. Now, of course, it's not the same as the cigar that you pay $12 for, but that's ridiculous anyway. But it is a hand-rolled, premium-made cigar with Dominican and Honduran tobaccos. It's an outstanding, value-priced cigar. And I purchased, there was a package of 4, and it was right around $10 or $11. So it's, for the price, to be able to get 4 premium made Dominican cigars it's an absolute must do. And they are wonderful smokes. And so I'm certainly pairing that tonight with this Christian Brothers brandy. And quite frankly, it's a marvelous combination. It's a marvelous combination. The Blender's Gold have a very thick, almost a spicy kind of definition to them. It's almost, and I'm trying to think of something that it almost reminds me of something close to a clove in terms of the aroma signature. And it's very easy on the palate, but it has a wonderful, deep, earthy aroma. And so that's why it's just absolutely exquisite with the brandy. So make sure that you are pairing your cigars and your pipes with some wonderful autumn themed drinks like a brandy or even a nice rum. We haven't talked rum yet on the show, but we will definitely get to it. So getting back to the film, and I'm not going to give away the ending. I know some of you who are kind of neophytes, maybe you haven't seen it. It's an iconic film, but there is a climactic ending in the forest with all of the aforementioned players, in which, of course, Gwen Conliffe is in great danger, walking through the woods alone, looking for Larry. The gypsy woman, Maleva, is there issuing all of her tidings of terror and horror. And it is, I will only say that it is a tragic ending. It is a very sad and tragic ending. However, I can say that Lon Chaney Jr. portrayed Lawrence Talbot / the Wolfman 3 or 4 more times in sequels. So this personal tragedy, this curse that has befallen Larry Talbot is a legacy, is a storyline that will continue to be played out over a series of films, this being the first one. And we'll probably get a chance to cover at least 1 or 2 of those sequels going into Halloween. But The Wolfman, 1941. An absolutely iconic. Now, when you're looking at the slideshow during this program, you'll see a lot of photographs, a lot of great photographs from the film. And as you look at the Wolfman makeup, it is certainly iconic. It's iconic in film history in general and in horror film history in particular. An absolutely iconic look that other filmmakers have tried desperately over the decades to duplicate or surpass. And it's just, there's nothing like that look that was achieved by master makeup artist Jack Pierce. And I mean, he struck pay dirt on this design. But this is the type of thing that you get from Universal Horror. Almost all of their mainline monsters have an iconic status. Whether it's Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman or Boris Karloff as the Frankenstein monster, Lon Chaney Sr. as Phantom of the Opera, certainly Bela Lugosi as Dracula, Boris Karloff again as the Mummy. The way the monsters were designed have become iconic, and almost everything else in the genre after them, to some degree, in some way, was trying to emulate, or was certainly inspired by those Universal monster iconic looks. So, yes, 1941. The film was produced and directed by George Wagner, written by Kurt Siodmak. Again, $180,000 budget, or roughly $3 million in today's money. Lon Chaney Jr., legendary actor, a much better actor than he was ever given credit for. And this movie and the subsequent reprisals of that role made him an icon to horror fans for the last 7 decades. Claude Rains as Sir John, Warren William as Dr. Lloyd, Ralph Bellamy as Colonel Paul Mumford, Patrick Knowles as Frank Andrews, Bela Lugosi as Bela the Gypsy, Maria Aspinskaya as Maleva the Gypsy Woman, Evelyn Ankers as Gwen Conliffe, J.M. Kerrigan as Charles Conliffe, her father and owner-proprietor of the Conliffe Antique Emporium. Faye Helm as the doomed Jenny Williams. And Forrester Harvey as the always hesitant, always scared out of his mind of shadows on the wall, Twiddle. So, there you have it. The Wolfman. Now, this, of course, in terms of where you're going to see it, well, DVD, Blu-ray, I have to believe that your cable and your satellite systems are running it at least this month. It may be on there all the time. Certainly, you may find it streaming somewhere. I don't know if Netflix is running it now or Hulu, but even if they're not, it's a DVD that's readily available and definitely needs to be part of your permanent collection. I mean, if this isn't in your collection, you're not being serious. You're just not being serious. Some people, and I mean some people in the film industry, still consider The Wolfman as the greatest werewolf film of all time. And of course, it's totally subjective, but I find it difficult to argue with that assertion. And it's certainly one of my all-time favorites. So, I'm going to continue enjoying my Blender's Gold Churchill cigar and continue sipping my Christian Brothers brandy. And I want to thank you guys for joining me for another episode of the show. Remember, you can listen to the show on the Blackwater Media YouTube channel. You can listen to the show on the Dr. William Lester Show Facebook page. You can also listen to the show on Google+. You can hear the show on my personal Facebook page, which just carries my name. And so there's plenty of platforms for you to hear the show. I appreciate the comments I've been getting on the Blackwater YouTube channel. Thank you very much. I love the support. Please keep listening. We have more films to look at. We're still relatively early in October, so we'll be able to look at several more. And it's going to be a great October. It's going to be a great Halloween season, and this is just a fantastic way to observe and celebrate it. So, remember, no matter what you do in all of your walks of life, remember to listen to the Dr. William Lester Show. Why? Because it's always cool and it's always vintage. And I'll see you next time. You're listening to the Blackwater Media Radio Network, the finest in digital audio entertainment. This is Blackwater Media coming to you from the great city of Atlanta. From the studios of Blackwater Media in the city of Atlanta, it's time for the Dr. William Lester Show. I am your host, and I want to welcome you to this unprecedented, unparalleled, enjoyable, exciting, and insightful exploration into the cool vintage lifestyle. As you know, on previous episodes, among other things, we have talked about some film suggestions for our annual Cool Vintage Halloween Film Festival. We are certainly going to continue that conversation tonight by talking about another film. Before we do that, though, I want to let you know what I'm enjoying tonight, refreshment-wise. I am having a sour apple martini, one of my favorite drinks. And what I've done, of course, and what I always recommend, is that you customize your cocktails to suit your tastes. Not what the society column says, not what the fashion magazines say, not the cornucopia of nonsensical concoctions that you may find on the internet, but take all that, to be sure, and customize it to your tastes. And what I've done is I've pared this down to something very simple, two simple ingredients. My sour apple martini is simply made from Smirnoff vodka, which is always chilled. I always keep a couple of bottles in the refrigerator, and a little bit of sour apple mixer made by the fine folks at Master of Mixes. I would prefer, and I certainly recommend, that you keep a couple of glasses in the freezer for just such an occasion, because it's always more enjoyable, more delicious when it's poured into a frosted glass. I am pairing that with a house brand cigar, which I secured from the fine folks at Cigars International, a retailer that I have been patronizing for a number of years. And they sell a number of cigar seconds. And you may be saying, well, what in the world are seconds? Basically, when these manufacturers make these fine hand-rolled Dominican cigars, they have overruns. And there is no qualitative difference between seconds and firsts. The difference is cosmetic, where the wrapper leaf may not be as aesthetically perfect as a first run, and so they will relegate those cigars to be sold as seconds. You still have all of the high quality premium tobaccos, long filler cigars, same premium content, same level of quality control in terms of how the cigars are rolled and packed, and everything in terms of quality and smokability is the same. But because they are not aesthetically perfect, because the wrapper may have an area that's slightly discolored, they'll sell it as a second, and it will be at a tremendous discount and therefore benefit to you, the buyer. And so you can buy bundles. They're usually sold in bundles of 20 or 25, and you can get a bundle of very high quality hand-rolled Dominican cigars at an incredibly reasonable price. Now, I believe that the cigar I'm enjoying was a part of a bundle that was, I believe it was $30, which is an incredibly discounted price for that number of premium hand-rolled cigars. So look for those when you are doing your cigar shopping. Cigars International has a fantastic website. They also have a wonderful print catalog, which just came out, by the way, with their Halloween issue. They call it the Fall Spooktacular. Mine came in the mail today. And of course, they are, as we are, embracing this incoming Halloween season by offering a great assortment of bargains for your cigar smoking pleasure. And bear in mind too, folks, that we're coming into that season, because the truth is, the coming of Halloween is actually the harbinger to the larger holiday season, which in fact carries us into the new year. It's a time of relaxation. It's a time of appreciation. It's a time of careful reflection. It's a time of celebration. And so what better way to observe all of those elements, embracing the cool vintage lifestyle simultaneously and enjoying a fine hand-rolled cigar, whether it's with friends watching a sporting event, or whether or not you are in the process of conducting business, or for no reason at all. But we're coming into that time of the year. On tonight's show, we're going to talk about one of the films that, again, this goes back for me many years in terms of awareness, in terms of enjoyment, in terms of quality, in terms of never getting tired of this one. We're talking tonight about a film called The Creature from the Black Lagoon. So let's go into some details about this one. This is a 1954 film created by Universal Studios. And this is a very interesting film for a number of reasons, but one of the most interesting things to me is the simple reality that in 1954, Universal was basically on the downside of its dominance of the horror film making genre. A position which they had certainly established during the 30s and 40s. But by this time, they were, as I said, on the downswing. Now, of course, that's really only recognizable in hindsight, because right at the time of Universal's decline in this genre, we see the rise of Hammer, the British film company. So it's a very interesting transitional period for this filmmaking genre. This film is or was directed by Jack Arnold, and let me run down the cast for you. Antonio Moreno plays Dr. Carl Maia. Richard Carlson plays Dr. David Reed, who is what I would call the leading man / hero in this film. Whit Bissell, Dr. Edwin Thompson. Whit Bissell is another one of those actors who I saw in film and television my entire life growing up. Even to the he was so familiar to me. I seen him so often I recognized his voice. The exquisitely lovely Julie Adams plays Kay Lawrence, who of course is the love interest of the Richard Carlson character. Richard Denning plays Dr. Mark Williams, who is kind of, while on one hand being something of a scientist, he's also this kind of crass, cynical Wall Street type guy. Always looking for the angle, looking for the opportunity to market and promote. Nestor Paiva plays Lucas, who is the eclectic, rambunctious captain of the boat, the Rita, which is central to the story. And two gentlemen who probably don't get what I feel is the necessary attention when talking about this film. Ben Chapman and Rico Browning. These men actually were playing the creature. Ben Chapman played the creature in all of the land-based scenes, and Rico Browning played the creature in all of the underwater scenes. And when you watch this film, it's a lush film, and it does have spectacular underwater scenes. The film was shot at, there were several locations, so let's run these down. It was shot at Universal City, California, Rice Creek near Palatka, Florida, and with additional shooting at Wakulla Springs, Florida. And when you see the film, I think you will very easily be able to pick out or point out those Florida scenes, especially if you've been to Florida. I mean, it's very obvious. And of course, they are those parts of Florida which can be made to approximate the look of the Amazon, which is what they're going for. I mean, the story takes place in that setting, the Amazon. Interesting side note, the creature itself was designed by Disney animator Millicent Patrick. And it was so unusual in those days for a woman to be at the helm of the design and execution of creature effects for a major studio motion picture, that for many years her involvement was actually played down. You know, as you know, on our show, we never kowtow and knuckle under to the madness of political correctness. However, in this instance, you have to give this lady her just respect, because she designed one of the most iconic creature images in the history of film. It's absolutely iconic. It's absolutely remarkable. And even after all of these years, the overall design of the creature, the overall effect of the creature on screen, on camera, it still works. One of the fantastic things about this movie is that it ages well. It's not dated. It's not some old stale monster movie. It's fun. It's exciting. It's thrilling. There are moments of suspense. There are a few moments of levity. So it still works. And this is one that is absolutely going to be viewed. It's going to be screened here. And of course, I recommend it for you as well, both for the holiday season and as a permanent fixture in your permanent collection. So this story unfolds, like I said, in the Amazon. And you have the older, more experienced Dr. Carl Maia, who uncovers a fossil embedded in a limestone deposit. And it's basically like a fossilized hand, but it's a hand with webbed fingers. And of course, to all of the scientists, this is kind of an oxymoron. This doesn't fit the story. This isn't supposed to be here. How can we possibly explain this? And so there's some back and forth and around. But the idea is, okay, well, this is the hand and forearm, basically. And the idea is, hey, if we mount up a proper expedition, we can go back in there and maybe we get lucky and we find the rest of the fossils, the rest of the remains of this creature. What a feather in our caps this will be. Endowments, grants, publicity, everything. While the scientists are deliberating over, whether or not to do the expedition, the creature itself, the living creature, attacks some of Dr. Maia's men who were left back at their base camp. And of course, when the expedition team arrives, they discover this to their horror, this mutilation. Which, of course, they don't know what's going on, so of course they're going to attribute this to some wild jungle animals, perhaps a jaguar. And so we're off. Okay, so they have chartered this boat, the Rita, which is captained by the Nestor Paiva character, Lucas. And they're sailing down the river. They're talking, they're looking at, and they comment on the fact that it looks like a primordial time period. The fossil that they discovered, the fossil that Dr. Maia discovered, by the way, was dated to the Devonian period. So you'll hear a lot of references to the Devonian age. And bear in mind, this is a pre-dinosaur period. So we're talking about, like I said, a pre-dinosaur period. So there's room there for all kinds of speculations on what kind of creatures might have walked the earth during that time period. So you see, we already have a swirl of interesting things going on. And eventually they come to a point in the tributary that kind of ends out at something that they call the Black Lagoon, which visually is like a tropical paradise, but it's got this reputation of a deadly place where strange, inexplicable things go on. So the Richard Carlson character and the Richard Denning character, Dr. David Reed and Dr. Mark Williams, respectively. Of course, they get to the lagoon and they can't wait to get on their scuba gear. They're down into the lagoon. They're looking for, of course, fragments of this fossil. And basically, it doesn't take very long before they are face to face with this creature. And then, of course, the conversation changes from finding a fossil to finding a living relic from the Devonian era. An even bigger feather in everyone's cap. Now, they are not set up for the capture of an unknown wildlife species, but that's not going to stop them. And so they do what they can. And again, we want absolute minimal spoilers. In fact, I'd like to try to do this with no spoilers, but this creature is a predatory monster, powerful, and people die. We won't get into the who's and the how's because, like I said, I want you to see the film, but there is something of a body count that starts mounting in this film. And there's an interesting interplay, of course, between the creature and Julie Adams. And of course, that's that whole thing, that whole Beauty and the Beast type of thing. And somehow she's going to be placed in great danger from this creature who's, that whole thing is there. And eventually the creature is able to abduct her. And there's a whole scene there. There's a whole couple of scenes there where, obviously we've got to save her. Her character is Kay Lawrence, and we've got to save Kay. We've got to protect her from this diabolical, bloodthirsty fiend. Great underwater photography, great action scenes, great attack scenes. Look for the scene where the creature attacks the Whit Bissell character, Dr. Edwin Thompson. That's one of those standout scenes that's just very thrilling and suspenseful. Now, the creature is traced or tracked to some kind of subterranean system of caverns. And a lot of the in-game confrontations occur there. And in these confrontations, again, what do we see? We see this creature is very dangerous. This creature is very powerful. This creature has far more physical strength than a man. And this is borne out in a couple of the scenes. In fact, the physical strength of the creature is such that it can survive multiple gunshots. And you will see that in the film. I won't go into the aftermath of those subterranean cavern scenes because that takes you right into the end of the film. But it's an incredibly fun film, and after all, I mean, if it's not fun, why bother? So let's go down all the particulars. Creature from the Black Lagoon, Universal Films, 1954, Jack Arnold directing. Antonio Marino is Dr. Carl Maia. Richard Carlson is Dr. David Reed. Whit Bissell is Dr. Edwin Thompson. Julie Adams is Kay Lawrence. Richard Denning is Dr. Mark Williams. Nestor Paiva is Lucas. Ben Chapman is the creature on land. Rico Browning is the creature underwater. Shot at Universal City, California, Rice Creek, near Palatka, Florida. Additional shooting at Wakulla Springs, Florida. Creature designed by Disney animator Millicent Patrick. This is a fun one. This is one that the kids can watch and enjoy, and it's that old classic Universal black and white feel. I believe the film was done in theaters in 3D, of course, which was a tremendous cinematic fad during the 1950s. I hope that you enjoy the film. I know that you'll enjoy the film. I hope that you can pick it up in time to include in your Halloween movie viewing. I know for a fact it's on DVD, available from many, many different retailers. I don't know what the streaming availability is, but it's a readily available DVD or Blu-ray. And fully restored, the film is absolutely gorgeous. 5.1 sound. The sound quality, the picture quality is just enjoyable from that very narrow set of aesthetics. So, I want to remind everybody how to listen to this program. We have a Facebook page designed especially for the show. It's called the Dr. William Lester Show. Every show is uploaded there. It's also on my personal Facebook page, which is just William Lester, and of course there's more cool vintage things posted there. You can hear the show, of course, on Google Plus and at the Blackwater Media YouTube channel. So lots of listening / viewing options. Now, as with all of our programs, there is a visual component. A great slideshow is prepared for each episode, and this one is no different. Please look at and enjoy the photographs that we have assembled for you during this broadcast. These are great photographs, sometimes even candid photographs from this film and from the production of this film. So I hope that you enjoy those. We're going to stop there, my friends, because this is the conclusion of another episode of the Dr. William Lester Show. Thank you so much for listening. But you know, it's always cool and it's always vintage. I'll see you next time. If you're enjoying the show, go on over to blackwatermedia.net and join the Swamp Hunter Society. Just click on the Become a Member tab on the menu, and for only $4.99 a month, you can have exclusive access to the finest paranormal, horror, and supernatural story narration content available anywhere. It's the ultimate digital audio exploration into mystery, magic, monsters, and myth. Become a Blackwater Media Swamp Hunter Society member today. From the studios of Blackwater Media in the city of Atlanta, I'd like to welcome you to another edition of the Dr. William Lester Show. And I have had an absolutely wonderful time doing this show, and starting to get some feedback coming from some folks primarily off of YouTube listening to the show and have expressed their enjoyment. And so thank you to those people, and welcome to new folks who haven't heard the show before. Of course, this is a show all about the cool vintage lifestyle, and On the last couple of shows, I have gotten into some discussion of television and movies. We talked about Kolchak, The Night Stalker, and we went in depth with that show, and we had a conversation about a horror film called Death Moon. And so I thought about a number of things to talk about tonight, but I realized that, we're cutting deeply into September now, and October, of course, is coming, and I spoke in an earlier show about, my cool vintage horror film festival, Halloween Film Festival, that I have annually. And so I thought, well, why not keep it going? Why not bring another film to the show? Another favorite that I have enjoyed down through the years. As a matter of fact, the film that I am going to talk about tonight, I referenced in the previous show when we discussed Death Moon. If you recall, I had mentioned that I had watched a movie that started about midnight. And also keep in mind, this is going back, I remember I must have been 12. I'd watched this film, and the Death Moon film came on after the first film. Well, that's the film I want to talk about tonight. The film was called The Curse of the Werewolf. And it was produced by Hammer, which was the British film studio, which really, in my view, took over the mantle of the horror film from Universal. And this film comes to us from 1961, and I think 1961 was right at the point where Hammer started getting its legs, and it really started producing the kind of horror films that would become a signature. Okay, the gothic horror in just remarkable color. When you look at a Hammer film, if you're familiar with Hammer, when you see a Hammer film, you recognize it immediately just from the camera angles, just from the look of the film. The movie is based on a novel called The Werewolf of Paris, of course by Guy Endore, book published in 1933. And strangely, when this film begins, you find that it's set in Spain, 18th century Spain. And I believe that had something to do with the availability of sets as the movie went into production. And there was a set that was historically appropriate, but it was Spanish. And so they just set the story in Spain. Now, before I go any further into details about the film, I'm going to go ahead and reach for my pipe, and I will tell you that we're going to enjoy one of the tobaccos produced by Brigadier Black, which is a company that produces a fantastic assortment of pipe tobaccos, really wonderfully aromatic, flavorful pipe tobaccos at a fantastic price. We're talking about a large size tin. I actually don't know how many ounces, but it's a very large tin for, I think, $16, $17, something like that. But they produce a nice variety. The one we'll be smoking tonight is called Alamo, and each of the different types has been named for some famous battle in history or some notable military event. I mean, there's one called Antietam, there's one called Waterloo, there's one called Sherman's March, okay, and of course there's one called Gettysburg. Well, tonight we will be smoking the Alamo, so I'm going to go ahead and take my diamond match and get it started. As the wonderfully aromatic smoke wafts up into the air. It's wonderful. Tonight, that is being paired with a very basic little concoction. It's really not even a concoction. This is just a little sipping whiskey. Something called Early Times, which I referenced in a previous show. A really nice old school brand. And I've just poured it over a little ice, and it'll be a wonderful companion to this Alamo. So, The Curse of the Werewolf, 1961, Hammer Films. The cast includes Oliver Reed, and I'm not sure, I think this may be his film debut, I'm not sure. We'll have to go back and double check, but it's very early on in his career. Clifford Evans, Yvonne Romaine, Catherine Feller, Anthony Dawson, and the legendary Michael Ripper, which is a fixture in Hammer Films. Hammer fans know the name Michael Ripper. Instantly recognizable, fantastic character actor. And when you're watching a Hammer film and Michael Ripper comes into a scene, you just kind of settle back into your chair because you know it's going to be fantastic. So let's go through this a little bit. As I said, it does start off in the 18th century in Spain, and the way it unfolds begins with a beggar, a wandering beggar, wandering the countryside, thin, emaciated, and you can look at this man, you can tell he hasn't had very much to eat, and he wanders into this town. I think they call it Santa Vera. I think it's, but he wanders into this town, and he hears the bells of the town square ringing, and he's wondering what's going on, and he finds out that the mayor, or whatever the nobleman who rules over that area, he's having a wedding party. And the beggar goes up to the castle to ask for food, ask for water. And when he gets there, he discovers that the nobleman is just a nasty, rude, crude individual. And he immediately starts making fun of this beggar, very sarcastic, and he offers him a small morsel of food, and he tosses it to him almost as if you would toss some table scraps to a dog. And he makes the beggar dance for his food, sing for his supper, so to speak, and it's very dehumanizing. In the scene, and you just feel sorry for this beggar. And anyway, this kind of goes around and around, and at some point the party starts winding down, and the nobleman rises with his bride and tells everyone good night, and the beggar very innocently says, "Have a good night, my lord," or something like that. And this nobleman is offended by this, and has the beggar tossed into the dungeon below. And Then there are a number of scenes where obviously the beggar is in prison down there, and he's basically neglected. And every now and then a few scraps of food are taken to him by the jailer and the jailer's daughter. So again, the beggar is neglected, and he's down there, and he's just almost living like an animal, a caged animal. A number of years go by, and the jailer dies, and the jailer's daughter, of course, she grows up to be the amazingly attractive character played by Yvonne Romaine. Now, I don't think that the character is ever named in the film. Eventually, the nobleman turns his attention to this obviously attractive servant girl. And by this time, he's an old curmudgeon. He's an ugly old mean-spirited troll. And no one wants to be around him. In fact, the only reason why people are around him is because he's a nobleman and he orders people around. He has servants and what have you. And he basically forces his attentions on her, and she rebuffs him, of course, because he's just about as unappealing as you could imagine. And he has her tossed into the dungeon. And when this happens, you can almost, it's not that you can tell what's going to happen, but I mean, you can just feel that, oh, this is not going to be good. And I won't, get into too many details here, but the beggar, by this time an old man, imprisoned old man, is almost reduced to an animal, and he's barely human in mind, body, or spirit. And he accosts her because they're in the cell together. And in the aftermath, he's lying dead on the floor of the cell. And she's lying on the floor of the cell, obviously having been abused despicably. She tells the guards that she will capitulate to the wishes of the nobleman. And again, I won't give this little part away because I really want you guys to see the film. But she's able to escape the castle by being clever and using her wits, because now it's a matter of survival. She's found in the woods, really more dead than alive, just kind of hanging on. And she's brought into the house of the character, Senor Don Colido, which is played by Clifford Evans, who is another face that you will see in a number of Hammer films. And he lives there with, the kindly old housekeeper. And they try to nurse this girl back to health. And at some point in her recovery, they discover that she is going to have a baby. And of course, things kind of go along, and she has the baby. And as a component of the storyline, the baby's born on December 25th. And there's a issue about that raised in the film about being born on Christmas Day, which is apparently an element of a lot of folklore. And there are a number of events, starting with the birth of the child, who they name Leon, going into his boyhood, where things become very strange. things become very strange. And there's some elements that I'm going to leave out here because I want to leave little gaps in here so that when you see the film, I won't have explained every minute element of it to you. But by the time he is a little boy, they realize that there's something going on, and it's got something to do with not just the day that he was born, but it has something to do with his mother and the situation that she was in before she was able to escape that castle. So, in a nutshell, this boy is cursed. He's cursed. A number of local goat herders realize that something has been coming in at night and killing their goats. And they notice, well, the goats have their throats torn out. And as experienced herders, as experienced outdoorsmen, they recognize that this is the work of a wolf. And so there's a whole melee about, well, there's a bloodthirsty wolf killing our goats. What's going on? And one night there is another attack, and the hunter fires, and he believes he hits the wolf, and he follows through the brush, and he sees the trail of blood. And so to some level, he was successful. And there's some things that come after that like I said, I don't like to play spoiler. So we get to the point where Leon is growing up, and he grows up. And the adult Leon is, of course, played by Oliver Reed. And he's leaving home. He's setting out to find his place in society, to make his mark on the world. And he ends up in this little village. I think this is a great place to do a pipe relight. So let's go back to our diamond matches. And that wonderful blue smoke rising in the air. And let's reach, of course, for our tumbler of early times. It's sensational. So he ends up in this little village, and he is offered a job working in a vineyard. He's offered a job working in a vineyard. And he's working with another guy who looks maybe to be about the same age. They may be in their early 20s. And that character's name is Jose. And it's a vineyard, and it's owned by a wealthy wine merchant. And they're bottling the wine and applying labels on the bottles and everything that goes into that. And he meets and falls in love with a girl named Christina, who's also the daughter of the man that he's working for. So you can see there's going to be some social dynamic, because the father is obviously wealthy, and the idea that his daughter would be consorting with a boy working in his vineyards or putting labels on the wine bottles, it's just, you could imagine. And of course, when night falls and the moon rises, the death toll begins. And I can tell you, watching this as a 12-year-old, it was absolutely terrifying. The way, in this film, the way that the attack scenes are structured kind of maximizes the intensity and the suspense. The way that this werewolf lurks and stalks its prey, it's fantastic. And you're a long time into the film before you even see its face, which I think is a great part of the film. I mean, you kind of see it in the shadows, you kind of see it in silhouette, you kind of see it lurking in the dark, leaping and crouching on rooftops. But it's very horrific. And it's snarling and growling. There is a scene in the film which Leon is in a room with a young lady that he's met in a restaurant, bar, casino type place where there's loud music and gambling and dancing, and it's a raucous place. And when you watch the film, and she's doing everything she can to kind of seduce him, and I won't give it away, but what ends up happening to her is just shocking. And needless to say, she meets a very unfortunate end. And again, the werewolf is it's on the prowl, it's on the hunt. It's out to make as many kills in one night as it can. And of course, by this time, I mean, you know, as a movie watcher, you know what's going on now. You know what's going on. Now, backtracking just a little bit, because, you know, in my hesitation to give too much away, I've left some things out that maybe I can tell you. But there is a priest in the film, and this priest has known of Leon since he was born. He baptized him. He's kind of counseled his adopted father, and he knows exactly what's going on. He knows exactly what's happened to the boy, now a man. He knows. And he explains to the adopted father, you know, this curse, this terrible curse, this werewolf, this lycanthropy. And he says, you know, maybe the boy can be saved, but this is a terrible thing, this evil force. And so the priest kind of injects an element of hope in the midst of the horror, and the murders continue. Eventually, even Leon's co-worker, Jose, falls victim to the savagery of the werewolf. Now, the girl Christina, the daughter of the nobleman who he's worked for, the girl falls in love with Leon. And so there's the love story, the forbidden love story angle here. Not only is he a poor boy, but he's cursed. And the love of this girl is probably the best thing that's ever happened to him. And he comes to believe that the love that she has for him, or the love that they have for each other, will save him, or maybe can purge this curse. He is arrested by the police because when some of the murders occur, he cannot alibi for his whereabouts. So it's that old police thing that never changes, right? Motive and opportunity. And of course, he is so gripped with fear and self-loathing and guilt and every other negative emotion that he basically says, listen, I'm a monster. I'm a werewolf. I change into a terrible creature. And of course, initially it's like, you know, yeah, whatever. You did the murder, so you're going to stand trial. And he says, yes, I did it, but I did it as a werewolf. And of course, people say, well, you know, okay, you're locked up now. And he basically tells them, no. When the change comes over me, this cell will not hold me. And if I get out, and I will kill again, and it will be on your hands. And because they don't really believe him, of course, he stays locked up. And it's so ironic because he's locked in a cell with the character that's played by Michael Ripper, who I referenced earlier, who is just the omnipresent figure in Hammer films. And Michael Ripper is playing a character in the credits that's listed as the Old Soak, which is just a kind British gentlemanly way of saying the town drunk. And the moon rises, and Leon goes into his transformation. And it's played out very, very well, very, very dramatically. And you've really got to see it, because the music that starts when he goes into the transformation are these really powerful pounding drums. And he lets out a wail. When he first realizes, when he first turns around and looks out and sees the moon, he lets out a wail that will go all the way up and down your spine 100 times. And he goes into the transformation in the cell. And you can see, and for the first time in the film, you see what starts happening to his hands, and more horrifically, his face. And remember now, Oliver Reed at this time was a big, strong, young guy. And so he was physically imposing. I mean, he looked powerful. And so when he was going through all of these gyrations and raging through this metamorphosis, it was terrifying, because you could just imagine the power that this creature has. And eventually, he just takes the door right off the cell. But previously he told them, this cell will not hold me. And now he's free. And I'm telling you, when you watch the film, he rips the door right off of this cell. And he goes out into the night. And now by this time, there's crowds and mobs gathered. And you kind of see the traditional, the idea, the old cliche about the villagers with torches and pitchforks. There's totally that scene there. And he takes to the rooftops, because of course he's stronger and faster and more agile. So he takes to the rooftops. And the people below are following and trying to see if they can trap him and corner him. And the going from rooftop to rooftop along there's railings and stairs and ledges and overhangs and all of this. And actually Oliver Reed is doing all of these stunt. It's not a stunt man. So it must have been, even for a young guy in his early 20s, it must have been physically daunting when you watch this scene. And I'm quite surprised that he didn't injure himself, which to my knowledge, he was not hurt. And eventually he comes to a church, and he climbs all the way up, and he's in the bell tower of the church, all the way up there. It's very high. And they start ringing the bell, and obviously it's so loud, and you imagine that the werewolf has very sensitive ears, and you can just tell that the loud tone is just driving him crazy, and he's just raging and snarling. And you see him at his full fury, this evil, powerful, predatory monster, who of course is the cursed Leon Colido, a poor boy from the most humble beginnings imaginable. Of course, I won't tell you how it ends, because a lot of the pleasure will be in getting excited and seeing it for yourself. Now, this is one that's out there on DVD and or Blu-ray, so you're not going to have very much trouble at all tracking this one down. And absolutely recommend. This is absolute stamp of approval on the cool vintage lifestyle movie watching, particularly for your Halloween film festival. Pick this one up. The Curse of the Werewolf. Again, here's the cast: Oliver Reed, Clifford Evans, Yvonne Romaine, Catherine Feller, Anthony Dawson, and the omnipresent Michael Ripper. And if you've seen it, you're just kind of nodding your head. If you haven't seen it, you're in for a real treat. Now, the werewolf makeup in this film is remarkable. And it's remarkable on a couple of levels. It's remarkable just on its own merits. I mean, it really works. And he looks really ferocious. And it's almost fashioned. It makes me think that the designers and the makeup people had the idea of a timber wolf, a gray timber wolf. The other remarkable thing to me is they chose not to rip off Jack Pierce's creation of Lon Chaney Jr.'s Wolfman depiction from Universal, because that had been the default template werewolf look. The cinematic werewolf look, of course, was established by Lon Chaney Jr. and legendary makeup artist Jack Pierce. A lot of filmmakers reduced themselves to ripping off that look, and of course it wasn't that, so it looked like, these other films, in many cases look like cheap imitations of Lon Chaney Jr. Well, Hammer didn't do that. Hammer did not do that. They created a unique look, a frightening look, and frankly, a look that became somewhat iconic. It was somewhat iconic. I don't think any werewolf, any movie werewolf, even to this day, is as iconic as the look achieved with Lon Chaney Jr. But this rendition, played by Oliver Reed, did achieve some iconic status. It was featured on many magazine covers in the 60s and into the 70s. Famous Monsters of Filmland, other fantasy magazines. That image was on many of those magazine covers. So it's absolutely cool. It's absolutely vintage. And it is a worthy addition to our Halloween Film Festival repertoire. So I hope that you go out and find that movie, track it down, because it's getting time to plan, how you're going to screen the films. Will you have friends over? Will it just be something you do personally, or however whatever works for you? I want to remind you guys about the different ways that you can listen to the show. Obviously, we have our Blackwater Media YouTube channel, which I think that's where most people who are listening end up going. But on my personal Facebook page, William Lester, and on the show page, the William Lester Show Facebook page, it's there. And again, if you want, it is downloadable. You can also hear it on Google Plus. But it is downloadable as an MP3 file, and it all kind of depends on what you're using to listen, with. If it's a laptop, you have to do one thing. If it's a Android phone or an iPhone or an iPad or a Kindle, each of these devices have a methodology for downloading MP3 files. You save it on your cloud. Build your own archive. So, I want to thank you guys. Again, it's The Curse of the Werewolf, Hammer Films, 1961. It's a winner. So, we'll stop it there. And thank you guys for listening. And I look forward to seeing you again. It's always cool. It's always vintage. See you next time.